Let's bring in On Balance host Leland Vittert. Leland, this news breaking within the hour here. Talk with us about the significance of this. You obviously, closely follow foreign policy.
I interviewed his brother, Mohammed al-Zawahiri, who was basically the leader of al-Qaeda in Egypt at the time back in 2012. The big takeaway is that for as much as we think about Osama bin Laden, and he still remains this fixture and the figurehead of Islamic terrorism worldwide, Ayman al-Zawahiri was the world's #1 terrorist. He was one of the original terrorists. He was part of the assassination of Anwar Sadat in Egypt. And that led to what we now think of as modern Islamic terrorism in the Sunni blend, which was al-Qaeda in the attacks on the United States, everything from the Twin Tower bombings in '93, the World Trade Center bombings, through 9/11. Zawahiri's video, we're seeing one of the ones that he released. His video released on September 11th or September 10th of 2012 is what inspired the Benghazi attacks and the killing of 4 Americans. The blood of countless American soldiers who were in Iraq and Afghanistan, particularly in Afghanistan. Their blood is on his hands. They planted so many of the IEDs and so many of the ambushes of U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. And to put a little bit of an added emphasis on what Chris said about how members of al-Qaeda are worried now and who's going to be next, there's always somebody who's going to be next. We saw that with al-Qaeda. We saw it with ISIS, and we'll see it again with al-Qaeda. But every minute that these terrorists spend worried about their operational security and their physical security, worried about the United States coming after them, is one less minute they have to plot attacks and plan attacks. And that's a very significant thing right now, this message. There was a killing of an ISIS leader a couple of months ago. This killing now of al-Zawahiri over the weekend continues to send the message to all of these terrorists: you're not safe. Therefore, you've got to spend a lot of your time every day worried about how to stay away from the United States.
Well, Leland, al-Zawahri, I feel like not as many people, if they don't follow foreign policy, are as familiar with that name, but yet played such an important role in the deadly 9/11 attacks. Everybody knew Osama bin Laden's name. Why is that? Why is there that difference?
Zawahiri was not nearly as public. He was the COO, if you will, of al-Qaeda, not the figurehead. And you see it in corporations all the time. You see it in politics all the time. The mastermind may not necessarily be the figurehead. And oftentimes it allows them to be much more effective. You think about it, al-Zawahiri lived 10+ years after bin Laden did, which is a huge thing in terms of not being as well known, not being as prominent, not having as many people talk about you. Not having that kind of notoriety. And look, terrorism from the Islamic world, really since the fall of ISIS, has not been top of mind for the American people. And Chris made an excellent point about President Biden from a political sense. He today, when he speaks in about an hour and a half, is going to say, when we left Afghanistan, I talked to you at length about that America would retain what their words were, over the horizon, and listen for that tonight, our over the horizon capabilities to take out terrorist leaders. And this is going to be used as example A, 1 year after the Afghanistan debacle, that he still, and America still has that power.
Well, Leland, we only have about a minute left, but just really quickly here, talk about the fact, we pulled some troops out of Afghanistan, but obviously al-Qaeda still poses a real threat.
There's no question that they still want to pose a real threat. Every day, do Americans wake up thinking about al-Qaeda? No. And by the way, that's to the credit of the U.S. military and the U.S. Intelligence establishment. And one of the reasons, as we look at some video of Afghanistan withdrawal, one of the reasons they don't feel that threat every day is because the terrorists remain on the run. And that will continue to be the message, and we'll hear it tonight from President Biden. To those who wish us harm, we will come and find you. And every minute that they're spending worried about a drone overhead is one less minute that they can spend plotting attacks.
Absolutely. Well, our coverage will continue at the top of the hour. Leland Vittert, thank you. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.